Thanks very much, Peter. I didn't understand some of what you said in the introduction, so I thought I'd just start by explaining a little bit about the Cloud Appreciation Society, and how maybe I thought I'd say how it got started, because it started sort of as a joke. Someone asked me to give a talk about clouds. It was a friend of mine. She was running a literary festival in the UK, and she asked me if knowing that I was an enthusiast about clouds, and I'll hopefully tell you a little bit about why I am. She asked if I'd give a talk. Now, it occurred to me in the weeks running up to this talk, which I obviously agreed to do, that people complain about the clouds a lot. I mean, I don't know about in Holland whether they do. In the UK, they complain about the clouds a lot. And I thought maybe people aren't going to come to a talk. Maybe it's going to be empty. I thought one way of making it more likely for people to come is if I gave it an unusual name. So no society existed, but I decided to call the talk the inaugural lecture of the Cloud Appreciation Society, just because I thought it sounded like weird and maybe intriguing. And it obviously worked. It was totally full. Problem was, everyone came up to me afterwards and said, "How do I join your society?" And I thought, well, maybe I should just start it. And I didn't really have any idea what it would be, or no real kind of conception what a Cloud Appreciation Society would do or be. But I thought, just in the kind of spirit of sort of, I don't know, organic growth, I'd just start it and see what happened. So I put up a website. When you become a member, is this working? When you become a member, you get a badge. And you also get a certificate which says, we do hereby certify that the person's name was elected as a member of the society on and the date, and will henceforth seek to persuade all who'll listen of the wonder and beauty of clouds. Because I think there's a need for a bit of campaigning to be done on the behalf of clouds. I mean, it's written into the English language, the negative associations we often have with clouds. If someone has a cloud hanging over them, then that's a bad thing. There's nothing worse than a cloud on the horizon. If someone's got a sunny outlook, that's a good thing. And we have this distinction between good weather and cloudy weather, which I think is a bad distinction and needs to be broken down. You can have a fantastically beautiful day with fantastically beautiful clouds, perhaps those cumulus clouds, puffy, that look like sort of airborne sheep blowing along in the breeze. Incidentally, so there are some, in other cultures you do get slightly different phrasing. There's an Arabic phrase for when someone's lucky or blessed. They say his sky's always filled with clouds. So there's a cultural thing going on there as well. And I put up a website, and it kind of expanded in the organic way that things can, in the kind of viral way that things can do on the internet. It's very much a society. It has become very much a society of the internet age, in that it's linking people who've got similar outlook or similar interests, but who bear no geographical relation to each other. And in that sense, it's a little bit like clouds. They don't pay any attention to political, cultural boundaries. And of course, everybody looks up at them. So the photos, I thought I'd show you some pictures of clouds. And the photos that get sent into the website, I've put up a gallery page, and people send in photographs from all over the world. And by the way, membership grew very sort of steadily, and it's now 12,500 members, 62 countries around the world. Don't know how many in Holland. I should have checked that fact before I came along. Couple in Iraq, all across the States, all across Europe, several in Africa. It's a real spread of members, and a real spread of ages between, some some people kind of give them to their godchildren, give a membership to their godchildren. Obviously, young children are some of the best cloud spotters in the world because they haven't developed this negative attitude to them that society can bring. So, and there's an even mix between men and women as well. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But they send in photographs, and sometimes these photographs are of particularly unusual cloud formations. What have we got here? So this is not a very common cloud formation. It's called a fall streak hole, and it's when you have a layer of cloud that happens to consist of what's known as supercooled droplets of water. Something can happen, and those droplets can suddenly freeze, and it's a little chain reaction takes place, and this freezing spreads from one point, and when the water freezes, the particles of water get larger, and they begin to fall down in a streak like this. So they send in rare photos. This is known as a Kelvin-Helmholtz wave cloud, and with the kind of appearance of breaking waves, which is very beautiful and very rare formation. You really don't see that very often. If you ever do, take a photo and send it in, please. Sometimes they're not particularly strange types of clouds, but they're in a very sort of dramatic form. So there's you've got a cloud which you do see elsewhere, but is shown very dramatically. And this is an example of what's known as a lenticular cloud. Lens shaped, Latin for lens shaped. All the Latin names for clouds, most of them refer to just the way it looks. They sound kind of complicated when you hear the Latin names: cumulus, cirrus, cirrostratus, cumulonimbus, cirrocumulus. But most of the time, they're just talking about the shape. And there's actually something quite poetic, I think, about those Latin terms. It's quite a nice thing to sort of talk over say in your mind as a sort of mantra. So this is in the island of South Georgia, lenticular clouds. And then sometimes they're not unusual. They're just beautiful pictures of the sky. And I think that the clouds are one of nature's most beautiful displays. I think that cloud spotting is a very, very important antidote to the pressures of modern life. I don't know how many of you remember when you were young looking up at clouds, but I certainly do. And I think that to stop what you're doing down here on the ground every now and then and look up and just tune in to what's going on above you forces you to slow yourself down a little bit. Because even though clouds can be moving at quite a rapid pace, from down here to observe them, you're a long way away, and so they appear to be moving in a very graceful way. It's a form of, in a way, like meteorological meditation, which I think is important to do every now and then, and just stop what you're doing and have your head in the clouds. And in order to do that, ironically, it kind of makes you a bit more grounded, I think. So yeah, just beautiful pictures. But one of the things that I do encourage people to do, encourage the members of the society to do, is send in pictures of clouds that look like things. Because seeing shapes in the clouds, perhaps there are two ways of looking at the sky. One is maybe more of a male way of looking at the sky, which is, what type of cloud is that? To classify it, and maybe what indication does that give to me about the weather that's in store? What genus of cloud? What species? Is it a clear example? Is it mixed with other clouds of different species? And then perhaps a more female one is more of an emotional reaction to the sky, and also finding shapes, I think, is more of a kind of, you have to let it happen. You can't actively go and find a shape. You have to let them appear. And I remember when I was young, I used to, when I was at school, I wasn't very good at finding shapes in the clouds. We did a little class in school when you had to look up and find shapes, and I got quite stressed about it because everyone else was finding shapes. And I later looked back on it and realized it was because I was sort of trying to do it in a competitive way. And then that's not the way to do it. You just have to sort of not look for shapes, and then they appear. So shapes, clouds in the shape of things, something that I love when people send in. Maybe see whether people in the audience can guess what the person sent it in as. And just feel free to put your hand up and shout. The first one's quite easy. Dog. Who said that? Someone down here. I've got bad sense of hearing, actually, because I can only hear out of one ear, but someone down there said it. Very good. A dog. This one. Dragonfly, absolutely. Incidentally, when we were looking at Edward's icebergs earlier on, I couldn't help seeing faces and shapes in those. So obviously I got a bit too stuck on this now. This next one was sent in to me as the Michelin Man going to rob a bank. Nice detail with the little gun there. I like that. Explain this, that thing off there. Specific is good, I've decided. When you're very specific about what it is, it's good. Anyone got any thoughts about this? Exactly, Salvador Dali. Exactly. That's how it was sent in. Some people did say, a couple of people mentioned Billy Connolly. Maybe you don't know who he is. It's not quite as an appropriate thing, I think. I particularly like the detail of his curling moustache there. Incidentally, the cloud before, the Michelin Man, this is known as a Cumulus Cloud, and that's Latin for stacked or heaped. And these are the fair weather clouds that form on a sunny day. And maybe I just kind of pause for a moment in these and explain very briefly the kind of principle behind how these clouds form. It's a little bit like a lava lamp. Remember lava lamps? You have a bulb in the bottom of the lamp, and the bulb not only lights the mixture of water, colored water and oil above, it also warms it up at the base. And so the oil, which is slightly denser than the water, is warmed by the lamp and expands a little and begins to float up in a very languid, relaxed manner. And when it gets near to the top, it starts to cool down, contract again, and sink back down. And it's a bit similar outside on a sunny day. Of course, we're talking about gases rather than liquids. But the principle is similar. The sun heats the ground, and certain patches of the ground, it may be a parking lot, or it may be a plowed field, compared to the trees around, or whatever other surfaces are around, you can get some bits which heat the air above it quicker than the others. And those can cause a bubble of air to expand and rise as a thermal. And when it rises, it can rise up to a certain height where it cools enough for some of the water, the gaseous water, to condense into droplets and form as a cloud. And it's like a kind of invisible man rising off the ground with a white toupee forming on his head, a wig. At least that's the way I think of it. So, Salvador Dali, if you were in an aeroplane and you saw this one, you might get a bit worried. The Grim Reaper. Well, what's this one? Any ideas about this? A what? Manta ray. Well, it could be, yeah. I mean, it was just sent as a straightforward flying saucer. But, I mean, it could be a manta ray. It's actually disc-shaped. So it could be like a flying plate or a frisbee. But I like that. That's a new one. These are lenticular clouds again, which they form. You can't see the mountainous region here, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that somewhere a few miles in a certain direction from here, there will be a mountain peak or more. And these clouds form in the lee of mountains. When you have a stiff breeze of air blowing, the air has to rise to get over the mountain. And in the lee of the peak, it can sometimes, in certain conditions, take on a wave-like shape. The flow of the air can rise and fall. And at the crest of each of these waves, a lenticular cloud can form if the air cools enough and has enough moisture in it. And I like them because you can have a strong breeze and the cloud hovers in the same place. It hovers in the breeze. The droplets form at the front. If you've got the air coming up, the droplets form at the front. They pass quickly through the cloud, and at the back, they evaporate again, where the air dips. And so it's a little bit like on a river. You've got a boulder, and just behind the boulder, the stream is flowing like this. Behind the boulder, you can have a wave shape on the surface of the water, which is a standing wave. It stays in the same place, even though all the water's flowing through. It's the same principle with these lenticular clouds. So I like them for that reason. This next one, you know when you have a party, you're a bit worried about the neighbors next door. There's an old lady next door, let's say. You think, well, you know, in order to, I'll tell her that I'm having the party, but I might as well, I suppose I really ought to just invite her. Of course, she won't come, but I better invite her just so that she feels positive about the whole event. This is the old lady turning up with her bottle of gin just as the party starts. A very big moustache. Fake moustache, of course. And then any ideas about this one? Dancing girl. Another option is a skateboarder in a bowl of in a half pipe, I think it's called. This is a cirrus cloud, which was one of the highest clouds, of the common clouds, and it's composed of ice crystals. The lower clouds are composed of water droplets. The middle clouds are one or the other, or a mixture of ice crystals or water droplets. And the high clouds, like the cirrus, are composed of ice crystals solely. And these crystals form up high at the top of the troposphere, or near to the top of the troposphere, and they cascade, they fall downwards in cascades of translucent white translucent colors. They're a little bit like, well, I mean, the Latin for them is a lock of hair. Cirrus is Latin for a lock of hair. Next one is two cats dancing the salsa, complete with the disco lights, which is a good touch, I think. I thought I'd now just say something about one cloud. This is no longer a cloud that looks like anything in particular, but it's a cloud that I went a long way to go and see. In fact, I went to the other side I went from the UK to Australia to go and see this cloud. I was looking through a book of cloud photographs. I saw this picture of like a long tube cloud. I know that it's called a roll cloud, and I thought that's a nice example of a roll cloud. There's interestingly some other ones behind it for some reason, and it's quite interesting terrain that it was over. I thought that would be an interesting cloud to see. I read here, the morning glory it's called. The fanciful name of this phenomenon conveys the feeling of elation which its passage arouses. So a cloud that's named after the feeling of elation you get when you see it. I thought that's quite cool. I should go and see that cloud if I can find some way of seeing it. And then I read that it only forms in northern Queensland in Australia, in a very remote part of northern Queensland. So I thought, okay, forget that. That's not going to happen. But then as I looked into it more, I discovered a very interesting thing about this cloud. It is a cloud that glider pilots travel to see because they can go up in their aeroplanes and surf it. It actually moves. It's this long tube which can stretch often as long as 500 miles 600 miles. You can see it on satellite photographs. And it moves along like this, rotating as it goes. I think it goes, no, it rotates against the direction, that's right, that it's moving. And the glider pilots can go and, if they're there at the right time of year, there's a certain time of year when it forms, the springtime, which is the end of October, beginning of September. They turn up at this time. If they're lucky enough for the cloud to form when they're there, they can get up on their aeroplanes, and the cloud forms, again, in a wave of air this time, not on a wave of air, but within a wave of air. They get up onto the front of the cloud, this rising air at the front, and they can surf. It's amazing surfing, amazing gliding. They can surf it to extremely long distances at very high speeds. I'm not a glider, but they tell me that it's an amazing thing to do. So I thought that's got to be something worth going to see. And I managed to sort of fiddle things. I wrote an article about it, and I got to do some little TV programs about it. I got Qantas to pay for my flights, and so I got it all set up to go the end of September, beginning of October, all the way to Australia. Burketown is the name of the town, and this is Burketown. 178 people live there. Absolutely nothing happens there. It's a tiny place in the middle of nowhere in the outback. The Flying Doctor comes once a week. They've got a restaurant, the Morning Glory restaurant, closed for the 2 weeks I was there. This is me every morning going out, hoping that the cloud's going to arrive. It arrives first thing in the morning. And it never did arrive. I started to get rather worried because days were going by and it wasn't arriving. And every time you went into like the one place in town that you could go, the pub or the post office, you'd see these pictures of this cloud up on the wall, and it get me more and more stressed. And I was beginning to get quite worried. Someone suggested go to the nearby island, and Dawn, the old Aboriginal lady, will do a dance for you that will bring the morning glory, her Wamor dance. So she did this dance, and it kind of went like this, clapping her hands. I haven't got the film of this, so you just have to guess. And it didn't arrive the next day, but the next day, some signs appeared. And the people in the town had told me to look out for the fridges in the pub, the fridge doors frosting up, and the tables in the cafe curling upwards. Both of these are signs that the cloud might arrive. Things were looking good. Very good. And the cloud arrived, and I filmed from a little aeroplane the glider pilot surfing it. I think we can just see this DVD about that now.
These glider pilots are about to go surfing on a wave of air which forms around a cloud called the Morning Glory. The cloud is in the shape of an enormous tube and rolls in at first light over the coast of Queensland from Australia's Gulf of Carpentaria. It offers what's got to be the most exciting gliding experience in the world.
You get on it, come over the face, and you can surf down. You can have a wing in the cloud and surf right down to the bottom edge.
With the absolute smoothness, being able to travel at high speed, the barest movements of the controls, that's completely different to how you normally fly a glider.
Very often you'll get a very strong primary cloud which rolls along very quickly.
You can jump back from the first primary wave off into secondary and third, fourth, and extend it like that. There's times when I reckon I've probably done about 500 kilometres.
The chances of something bad happening are high. You're flying at quite low altitudes over remote areas, and they're full of crocodiles.
If a surfer were to go too far into the back end of the wave, he wipes out. Equally, we wipe out too, but I think with probably more disastrous consequences.
I think you'd only have maybe a dozen people in the world that really have done it. It is unique, that's for sure.
word hasn't spread much yet. It's good to share it with everybody, but I wouldn't like to see it becoming like a traffic jam.
Generally 10 or 15 minutes into the flight that the sun comes across the top of the cloud, and when you look back at that site with this fantastic golden sun breaking behind it, it's, you'd swear that you're in heaven. It's that good.
Society is complete without a manifesto. I'm just going to read out the Cloud Appreciation Society manifesto. We believe that clouds are unjustly maligned and that life would be immeasurably poorer without them. We think that clouds are nature's poetry and the most egalitarian of her displays, since everyone can have a fantastic view of them. We pledge to fight blue sky thinking wherever we find it. Life would be dull if we had to look up at cloudless monotony day after day. We seek to remind people that clouds are expressions of the atmosphere's moods and can be read like those on a person's face. We believe that clouds are for dreamers and their contemplation benefits the soul. Indeed, all who consider the shapes they see in them will save money on psychoanalysis bills. And so we say to all who listen, look up, marvel at the ephemeral beauty, and always remember to live life with your head in the clouds. Thanks very much.